This is Amanda Edwards, and I'd like to welcome you to the Edwards Empowerment Talks. This podcast provides a platform to empower individuals and the community by showcasing stories of resilient people who have refused to let life's challenges prevent them from achieving their dreams. The Edwards Empowerment Talks will also highlight the work being done in the community that will help to positively shift the trajectory of this nation through stories of adversity, perseverance, drive, struggle, and success. The podcast will empower others to believe in their dreams and pursue those dreams despite whatever challenges may come their way. It is also a vehicle to equip the community with the tools necessary to be the change they want to see. I welcome you to tune in. You don't want to miss this. Well, I want to welcome you all back to the Edwards Empowerment Talks podcast. I am smiling from ear to ear because I have a very special guest here with me today, and that happens to be Dr. Roger Mitchell. And he's not just any doctor. Dr. Roger Mitchell happens to be the Chief Medical Examiner of Washington, D.C., and Deputy Mayor of Washington, D.C. as well, among a host of other different hats that he wears, ranging from a loving husband, a minister, as well as a father of three. So talk about a man who is juggling it all. That happens to be my friend, Roger Mitchell. So I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Great to see you, Amanda. How are you?
I'm doing well. And, I've been having a good time with these podcasts, having some really interesting discussions, talking to people with different walks of life, trying to inspire the listeners and the viewers about how they can learn from people who have defied the odds and translate some of the lessons learned from those experiences to their own lives. And also for those who are interested in getting involved in the community, how to go about doing that in traditional and untraditional ways. And so when I thought about one of my guests and who I should be inviting, I had to reserve a spot for you, not just because you've had such an interesting story of defying the odds and of success, but also because you have always dropped these marvelous gems of wisdom and since I've been knowing you. And so I know that our listeners and our viewers will benefit from hearing just some of your truths that are also extremely timely, especially in a time where we're seeing so much turmoil take place right before our eyes. So Dr. Mitchell, can I just call you Roger for the show?
Yeah, Roger's
okay. Good. So Roger, let me go back. I mean, you wear many, many hats, and we're going to get into what that is like. How did you get here? But I want to always start with my guests by talking a little bit more about their background. Who were they growing up? What limitations did you have imposed on you growing up, or what encouragement did you have along the way in order to really set your sights high? And so I'd love to hear, who was little Roger?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you, Amanda, and your viewers don't know that we've known each other for 13 years, I guess. We met back in 2007, young professionals, Houston, Texas, right? Urban
That's
League,
right. That's
right? This was before you got into politics. And I must say, I'm so happy that you didn't let the outcome of the election dull your voice, and that you found a way to give your voice to the voiceless. That's huge, and I'm so proud of you. So I don't want to go into it without giving you that love too. So
thank you.
No, I appreciate you. So I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. I have two sisters. I'm the baby boy of the bunch. My mom and my dad divorced when I was about 10. So I was raised by a single mother. That single mother raised me fantastically. I mean, she was a loving mother. Me and her are really good friends even now, best friends, to say that. And but my father, he fell to crack cocaine. So we're talking about, I'm ex-gen, so I'm 46 years old. So that's when they were putting your mothers in jail just for using. They were putting I mean, whole families were taken apart
Mm-hmm.
surrounding substance use and abuse. Whereas today it's seen as a public health issue. It was a definitive criminal justice issue then, and where structural and institutional racism was at, some would say, at part of its height in the 80s. Although we're fighting it now, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. But so I grew up, father addicted, my mother, working mother, middle class, two sisters much older, and so really looking for a image that I could connect to.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's father was a physician. He graduated medical school in 1932 from Howard University. And
Something in
so
common there. I think you have Howard. You and
Yeah, yeah,
your.
yeah, of course, of course. I'm a proud undergraduate alum.
Okay.
And so I connected with his legacy. I connected with his story of being a black bag physician in the black community, delivering babies, treating the sick, getting paid with pies and cakes. He was in Atlantic City, New Jersey, was one of the first black physicians in that city. So walking those streets and people pointing to me and saying, "You're Dr. Marshall's grandson, aren't you?"
Mm.
And so with pride, I knew that I wanted to cling to his legacy. So my whole youth, really from the age of 6 years old, I knew I wanted to be a physician like my grandfather because
Mm-hmm.
of the stories. And so, little Roger ran around playing soccer. I was a soccer player,
Okay.
and so really getting to who I wanted to be was trying to get out of the shadow of the addiction of my father,
So
to the
at
presence
so
of
at
my
that
grandfather.
point, so did you have an ongoing relationship with your father when you had the addiction, or was it kind of you heard stories about what was going on or what had been going on with him?
So so we left around 10 years old. And it was, I have a book out called The Price of Freedom, A Son's Journey,
Mm-hmm.
where I kind of lay out this part of my life. And at the end of the day, he left me for 3 days in a home by myself when I was about 10 years old.
Wow.
And so when I emerged out of that, I didn't see him again until I was uh, 17, 18,
Oh wow.
because
So
I
all of
heard that,
your formative years, he was
yeah,
gone.
he was gone. Absolutely. But I had a godfather,
Mm-hmm.
Gregory Thompson Sr., who was two doors down. And this is the impact of mentors, the impact of reliable, consistent adults cannot be understated, right? It really
Yes.
is something that's necessary for all of us, but especially those that have an absent parent. He acted like my godfather, my father. That was my second family. Today, still today, they're my second family, and they help raise me when my mother is at work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I cling to the notion of my grandfather, but got examples of manhood from my neighbor.
Yeah.
And so really pursuing excellence was about, and this is the kicker, was about trying to create environments where my father could show up.
Hmm.
um, and so, being captain of the football team when I was in high school, being in plays on the stage and having lead parts, creating an environment where I was, getting accolades for my academics. All of those were trying to create a platform for which my father could show up, and he never did.
And you would just
Um,
watch for him to show up, and
Watch for him
he
to show
wouldn't be
up.
at the game.
That's right. That's right. Wouldn't show up at the speech. Wouldn't show up at the show. Wouldn't be at the game. And so I messed around and succeeded. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
so I messed around and got good
Yeah.
in this effort to show myself worthy of love of a father. And I think this is important for your listeners. The level of vulnerability. My ministry is transparency. Is that you don't heal unless you can talk through the issues that are important.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's interesting too is sometimes that's pain can be at the root of our motivation to excel. And I think in your case, you had a void, you were looking for that. you wanted him to, even though you had the support system, you had someone you could look up to in terms of your grandfather's legacy, you had your neighbor who was investing in you, but yet and still you wanted your father's love, you wanted his presence, and you went out of your way to achieve and create these avenues that he could be proud of you and be present in. And yet and still, like you said, you messed around and became good because you were still trying to find this way to bring him into your life. And so that must have been a very painful experience. How did you navigate that pain?
Well, I think pain is part of the growth process. There's no pain without birth,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no birth without pain, right? And so, and then this growth process has pain, and we're all subject to some level of pain, right? We
Mm-hmm.
all have a story, if we're honest,
Mm-hmm.
about where we didn't feel adequate or where we were challenged or where we were dropped. When I minister inside the prison, I talk to the men about that time when you were dropped, that dropped moment, and really trying to realize, when were you dropped? When were someone supposed to hold you and take care of you and care for you when you couldn't care for yourself, and they dropped you? And then have you forgiven that person for dropping you, and have you forgiven yourself for being dropped? No one would ever blame a baby for being dropped out of the arms of the caretaker. So
Mm-hmm.
you shouldn't blame yourself for the moment in time where people didn't take care of you properly.
Hmm.
um, and so it's so important for us to value forgiveness, um, forgiveness of ourselves, but also forgiveness of the other person, so that we give ourselves permission to grow. And so, can I say at 17 years old, I had introspection of forgiveness in the drop moment? No,
Wow.
I was angry, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
You're
I
like,
mean, I
what are
was
you doing
angry.
here now?
Yeah, I'm, and that moment when I was 17, when I saw him again, it was under a boardwalk, and he was living in a shelter.
Oh,
So it wasn't
wow.
like he came fully back in my life. I
Mm-hmm.
went and looked for him. I went and tried to find him because I knew I was going to college and I needed that some level of closure. I was an adult for a long time, Amanda.
Yeah.
And so, but that level of forgiveness and the pain, man, it's like, I don't know about you. You were an athlete, so you might have broken a bone. I broke my hand when I was in college,
Mm-hmm.
and when it rains, man, I can still feel it right now. When I rub it, I can feel where the callus is. It's
Yeah.
fully healed. It's fully healed. I have full motion of this
Mm-hmm.
hand, but there's points in which this hand hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I broke it. That's the same thing with the scars in our emotions.
Yeah.
So as a 46 years old man, sometimes it still rains.
Yeah.
And that time when I was 11 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, and didn't have a father, sometimes I remember that pain.
Yeah.
It's not as painful as it was when I broke it, but it's still painful. And I think people all, and this is not just an experience for me. If we're honest, we all have the same human experience.
So let me ask this question because I think that something needs to be addressed in terms of, if you're somebody who can feel that pain and it's throbbing and it's consistent, how do you break through so that it's more in line with the description you provided, or this analogy of on occasion versus something that's constant and weighing you down and ever present,
Yeah,
in a
so good.
sense where you cannot move forward? It's just dragging you down,
So
and
good.
when you wake up it's the first thought, and when you go to sleep it's the last thought.
Yeah.
How do you, and especially how did you, so not just telling someone else what to do, what did you do? Was it the act of trying to find him and forgiving him, or was it a gradual process that took place over time? How did you navigate through that? Because I think so many people carry, the song Bag Lady, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, it's not just bag ladies, right? It's bag people,
Yeah, yeah.
because people
Yeah.
carry a lot with them, and it can hold you back. And so how did you say, no, I've got these good role models in front of me. I'm not going to fixate if I can help it. I'm not going to fixate on this pain. I'm going to try to push through it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so good. I'm like in my seat jumping around because because you got me wanting to preach. I mean, there's a bomb in Gilead.
I didn't bring a collection plate.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, that's all right. I'm on Instagram. No, there's a bomb in Gilead. There's a salve,
Mhm.
and so you have to give yourself permission to heal. You
Mhm.
have to give yourself permission to heal, and you have to be willing to go through the healing process. But
Mhm.
if you're always picking at the wound, you're always putting your finger in the wound, then it'll never heal. So it will always be there. And so let me tell you, my faith is my salve,
Mhm.
right? So my faith in God is my salve, it is my healing, it's my
Mhm.
healer,
Mhm.
because I know that there was an event that happened that stripped away all the baggage that I would have to carry,
Mhm.
because he says his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So when
Mhm.
you're able to give up the things that you think you need to carry yourself
Mhm.
to an entity that can carry that,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And
Yeah.
see, always say the people that don't need Jesus, like the people that don't need faith to
Mhm.
move themselves forward, man, they are fully healed people then.
Yeah.
But those of us that are broken, those of us that have been broken, those of us that saw an opportunity when there was no way out, some people that were on their knees and didn't have a purpose, um, you know, to be able to connect with the entity that gives you life, that tells you that you don't have to be in that position forever, there's
Mhm.
hope in that. There's
Yeah.
joy in that. There's favor in that. And
Eh,
so for me, that my secret potion
Mhm.
is my faith in God, right? And
Mhm.
people say, well, how do you do it? You know, you're in seminary now. You're two jobs at the highest level. You know, all of these things. Family's great. What do you do? I said, Jesus. And
Mhm.
people go, oh, you know, and they might not come back for a while, but then they end up then they'll come back and they'll say, all right, well, tell me again what it is. And
You like
people
the
are
same
looking,
answer. Yeah.
right, people are looking for people to walk the walk. You know,
Mhm.
this, you know, I know you got other questions for me, but the reality of it is that what it boils down to is how we're going to love our God and how we're going to love each other.
Mhm.
And so if and it's really simple, but it's hard because we don't want to love each other, right?
Mhm.
So and we don't want to love God. So
Mhm.
we don't want to love ourselves,
Yeah.
because we're caught up in the things of this world that make us vain. But I say this to say is that I learned at a very young age how important it was to not rely on myself for my success.
Mm.
And so if there's a message that can resonate through, is that if you're relying on yourself for success, then you're putting your faith in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And if service of others is not part of your that hallmark of what you want to be successful in, then you'll never be successful.
Mm. See, I told y'all that Dr. Mitchell has all these wisdom gems and just he's a wise
I don't
man.
know about that. I don't know
Yeah.
about that. But
So you meet your father under a bridge
whew,
at the age of 17 years old, and
mm.
then you go off to college.
Yep. Howard
So
University.
had you committed to having a relationship with him, or you just needed that closure?
Yeah, no, no one was ready for a relationship. Had he had been ready for a relationship, um, then we probably would have had one. But because I was always searching for a relationship,
I
he
see.
wasn't ready for a relationship. Not then. I mean, we ultimately have one, but then at that point at 17, he wasn't ready. I mean, he was still fast talking. He was still,
Mm-hmm.
moving and shaking, asking for money.
Yeah.
So he wasn't ready for that. But I was ready. I needed to make sure that I'm as part of my journey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one that I won't leave you behind.
Mm-hmm.
I just won't. I'm a real, as faulty as I am, my loyalty is one of the things that I try to hold up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I even fracture my loyalty, I feel so terrible.
Yeah.
So my loyalty is something great. No, I went on to college at Howard University and was a biology major, chemistry minor, and working a couple jobs and
Was
you
that
know
smooth sailing, working those couple of jobs and
no,
being a
no,
biology and chemistry major?
no, I chemistry minor.
Okay,
But
chemistry minor.
yeah, yeah, but no,
Difficult nonetheless.
I failed my first two exams. Let me
Okay.
tell you something. I went in there and I had a 3.7 coming out of high school, one of the best high schools in New Jersey, captain of my football team. I was rocking. I was going to Howard University, the Mecca. I went in there, did my own little 2-bit studying for the exam, and it was like wah wah
They
wah.
were like,
It was
"What?"
terrible. It was awful.
And so,
And yeah,
how did you recover from
listen,
that?
I called my mom and I was like, I need to transfer. I'm not made for this. I'm gonna, go into construction. No, no, no offense to construction workers. They probably make more than me right now. Um, but no, I talked to one of my brothers, and this is another lesson, man, just to keep people around you that want to lift you up,
Yeah.
and people around you that see the good in you. Sometimes when you don't see it yourself,
Mm.
having that group of people around you. This brother Umar Abdul Rabil, we were both freshmen.
Mm-hmm.
uh, you're talking about wise men. I'm boo-hooing at a fact that I failed this exam, and he said, "Yo, man, how many mountains have you climbed to get to this position?"
Mm.
And I said, many mountains. He said, "So you're gonna sit at the bottom of this one and cry?
Hmm.
Then all the mountains that you've crossed before you got here mean nothing." Yo,
Wow.
he's
How old
18
is he?
years old.
I was
He
gonna
was eight.
say.
He was, he was 18 years old.
Yes.
Sage, right? 18,
Seriously.
Sage. And I said to him, and I wiped my tears. And I went to see the TA. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I went and got my tutoring. I went and figured it out. I went and sat with the professor. And I ended up doing well at Howard while working multiple jobs. So
And I think that's something, although early on for you, it's something that is so transferable, which is that just because this is your pathway, it does not mean that every juncture and every twist and turn of it is easy and smooth. It can be very rocky, and you can question the journey you're on, even if it's yours. And I think that's a really palatable example of moments that we face in terms of failure of some sort in having to make a decision to keep going, because it's a decision, it's a choice. Sometimes the roads and the doors get closed to us because they're just not intended for us. But other
mm,
times we give up on ourselves,
that's so good.
and we cannot allow that second part to be true. If it's not meant to be, then it's just not because I didn't try for it or because I got discouraged. It just should be, that's not for me, versus you giving up on yourself midway through your journey. So, okay, so you worked, you eventually turned those grades around, and
Hmm.
then what happens next for Roger?
So I uh, was tired, and I was getting to the end of Howard, and I didn't, I knew I was supposed to go to medical school, and I just was like, I can't, it's too much. And so I was looking for an opportunity that was a little bit different than going to medical school. And so I was actually doing DNA work at the Sickle Cell Center for Howard, and we were doing HIV and AIDS research. And this is in about 95, 96. And the OJ Simpson trial was on,
Oh, wow.
and we were listening to OJ Simpson, and the trial was on, and they were talking about DNA and blood
Mm-hmm.
evidence, and I was doing DNA work in a laboratory, and then this word forensics came up,
Because that was like
And
the first major trial where
that was the
that
first,
became,
yeah.
yeah, like mainstream.
Absolutely, absolutely. There was no CSI Miami, CSI LA, NCIS. None of that existed before OJ. OJ put forensic science, really up and center.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that word and was really doing well in the laboratory. And I said, well, I want to be a forensic scientist. And so I applied all up and down the seaboard, in the Northeast, trying to see where I would be a forensic scientist. And the FBI was hiring.
Okay.
Um, so I applied to the FBI. They were moving their agents out of the laboratory because they wanted to get accredited, moving scientists in. And at the time, there was a such thing as affirmative action. Can I say
Mm.
that word?
Yes, you
Affirmative
may.
action.
Yes,
Oh
you
man.
may.
And it was quotas. There was like you needed to have a certain amount of African Americans in your least application pool and
Mm.
your interview pool in order for it to get approved, especially in the
Wow.
federal government, right? And if you had a black man, it was like double star, right?
Wow.
Because to give a black man an opportunity during those times was thought to be creating equity. But back then they called it equality. Now we call it equity because we know
Mm-hmm.
it to be different.
Mm-hmm.
But so 250 applicants. I was good enough to make it to 25 interviews for 3 positions, and I got one of the positions. So I became one of the first black men in FBI laboratories, and I was the first black man in DNA FBI laboratories, and that was 1997. So that was where forensics started coming in, and I did, items of evidence from violent crime, and really did well in that environment. Got exposed to the medical examiner, who was a forensic pathologist physician, and right then I knew, okay, now I know what type of doctor I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I took 2 years off. And another lesson for your listeners is that there's such a herd mentality
Hmm.
in this country. Everybody has to go from base to base at the same time. Sometimes you got to do things your own way. And the real successful people do things their own way. The
Hmm.
real successful people take their own path. They follow their intuition. And they work hard at blazing their own trail. And so, I made a decision not to go straight to med school when people were like, what? You're not going straight? Like, you know, and I was like, I may not ever go because I might want to be a, FBI agent,
Mm-hmm.
and forensic scientist. But then I got exposed to the medical examiner and I made the decision to go to medical school. So,
So tell me about that exposure in terms of saying, so at what point did you say, one day I aspire to be the chief medical
mm,
examiner, for example?
that's funny because I was in my, first year of medical school, first weekend,
Okay.
um, and they had us all
And where were
wrapped
you in
around.
medical
Yeah,
school?
I was at Jersey Med in Newark,
Okay.
and I was born in Newark, raised in South Orange, so I'm a Jersey guy. And so I'm there, back home, and I'm excited. I'm in med school, and they go around. They say, "Well, what?" They're asking everybody what they want to be, and I said, I'm excited. So I said, I want to be the chief medical examiner of New Jersey, right? I'm excited. And the professor, he laughed at me. He said, you need to just worry about passing your first class.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So, so
So in
because
other words, don't dare to dream in this
no, what are
space.
you talking? No, listen. Now everybody was like, I want to be a surgeon. Everybody wanted to be a type of doctor,
Yeah. But you could
but
not
my
want.
but my type of doctor
Yeah.
was beyond my reach.
Yeah.
My type of doctor was, how dare I
Mm-hmm.
be so confident and so clear on who I wanted to be? How dare I suggest in front of all these people that I had it figured out?
Hmm.
No, 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 son. You need to doubt yourself.
Yeah.
And see, so I laughed too. I laughed back at him because he didn't know me, right?
Right.
He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what I've seen, what I've been through, where I was from. He obviously didn't read, the resume. You know what I'm saying?
He
I
said,
mean,
read the
he obviously,
resume.
he ain't checked the playlist. So no, I remember when I left the FBI, I knew I wanted to be a chief medical examiner.
Okay.
Like I didn't just want to be a forensic pathologist. I said, if I'm leaving this, I'm going to be the top guy. And that's absolutely what was my vision.
And so, after you finished medical school,
Mhm.
how did you go about becoming the chief medical examiner?
Well, it's funny because those things take time.
Yeah.
So when it's your vision, it's really like um it's like Joseph. Joseph had this fancy coat on, and he went and told his brothers that, oh, look at my fancy coat and I'm dad's favorite. But
Mm-hmm.
he ended up getting thrown in a ditch because of him boasting about his dream.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept my dream to myself mostly. And so I went to Houston, right? So
Yes.
so before that, I did my residency, became chief resident at George Washington in pathology. I did my fellowship in New York City at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City. And I left there to come to Houston. And Houston was my first job in Houston, attending physician position.
Mm-hmm.
And so leadership along the way, chief resident leadership along the way, always been leading, was working in the Student National Medical Association, working on violence prevention related activities, always looked at violence prevention as a public health issue. That was another reason why I wanted to go to medical school. Um, and writing curriculum for at-risk youth, all of that work, just really trying to work in community and do what God is telling me to do. And when I got to Houston, I was in my first year, and a position came up as the assistant deputy chief medical examiner in charge of all investigations for Harris County. And so
Which
that's
is
a
the third largest county in the country.
absolutely third largest county, 24/7, 16,000 deaths calls a year, 500 homicides a year, at least when I was there. Really, really
It's amazing you
robust.
remember those statistics so well.
Oh, I live it, right? This is
Yeah.
the work, right? So death investigations is 24/7. I had about so this position became available, and I was a first year attending in this office and was tapped by the deputy chief and the chief medical examiner to run that, to be the first physician in charge of that unit.
Mm-hmm.
Um and that was extremely important, because that's really where I got my medical leadership. So now I'm the assistant deputy chief medical examiner. I'm in charge of the 24/7 operation. I have 22 employees, a $2.2 million budget, right? And I have to triage all the death investigations, all the scene investigations for Harris County, the third biggest county in the country, right? So, and I'm 25, 26 years
Wow.
old,
Mm-hmm.
right? So was I? No, how old was I? No, I'm sorry, I'm 33 at that point. So I'm a little older than that. So the long story short on that is that that's where I kind of learned that, man, I could be a chief because I'm learning how to run this organization from where I sit. I'm getting grants. I'm being effective in community. That's where we met. So that's really where I kind of knew I wanted to be a chief. And then my wife and I decided we needed to come back to the East Coast because we had elderly grandparents and mothers that required us to be present.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back to New Jersey, and as part of my coming back to New Jersey, I put in a bid to be the acting chief medical examiner for the state of New Jersey. So now I'm my office is on the campus of my medical school,
Wow.
and there was a professor in
I
that
was going to say
medical
that
school.
professor is
Come on,
not there anymore, I'm
no,
sure,
he's
but
not there anymore. But I
because if he
remember
were, you might have stopped by just
I
to let
might have
him know.
stopped by and talked to him because I remembered that I wanted to be the chief medical examiner for the state of New Jersey. And at that point, I was the youngest chief medical examiner in the
Wow.
country.
Wow.
And I was there in the state of New Jersey, and I was the chief medical examiner there. So,
Now, let me pause
yeah.
because I think what you shared was a remarkable story of what you were able to achieve. Was that journey easy for you? Did you have trials and tribulations? How did you also manage to? Because when I met you, it was through the Urban League.
Yeah.
So how were you spending your time volunteering with the Urban League? Excelling with your work, because you're not going to get more responsibility if you can't exhibit that you can handle the current responsibility.
Yeah.
So you have to excel. And I know sometimes what, especially for young black professionals, when people see that you're doing well in your professional life, then here comes Civic Club X or Y and Z, and be on this board, be on that one, do all of the other things in the community as well. How did you balance the, work and professional excellence that you needed to exude with your desire to really be present and know about what was happening in the community and actually make a difference there?
Yeah, and be a father, right?
And be
Uh,
of
and be a
three,
father and be
of
a
three.
husband,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because medical school you have to pass boards. I failed my step one boards and had to take them again. I failed my step two boards and had to take them again.
Mm-hmm.
So while in medical school, I was because I was uh, doing protests on the killing of Amadou Diallo because he
Mm.
was shot at 42 times, hit 19, had entry wounds in the soles of his feet. Writing position papers on police brutality as a public health issue back in the early 2000s, 2001. 2000 and 2001, I wrote a position paper for the Student National Medical Association that was published in their journal surrounding police brutality as a public health issue. Um, Years before George Floyd, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, no, the rockiness, you know, what do you, have you ever known a mountain not to be rocky?
Right. I love that. Say that one more time.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever known a mountain not to be rocky? The goal is not to fall off the mountain
Right.
because I'm a free form climber. I got no harness.
Yeah.
Well, there's a harness, but his name is Jesus. But the point that I'm making is that it is absolutely rocky.
Mm-hmm.
It calluses on your hands,
Mm-hmm.
skint knees. I mean, your feet hurt. This is a contact sport. If you're gonna climb the side of a mountain, it takes you're going to hurt. It's gonna hurt and it's gonna be hard.
Yeah.
It's not intended to be easy. It's not, it's a mountain that you're climbing.
Right.
And so with headwinds and with the climate around you, there's so many things that are coming your way when you're trying to scale the side of a mountain that you don't even know what is at the top of it,
Hmm.
right? And you're prayerful that at the top there is a prairie with daffodils, right? And water springs and antelope, right?
Not
You're hoping
antelope.
antelope, right? So you just hope that when you get to the top of the mountain, there's some freedom there,
Right.
that you don't have to scale an endless mountain,
Yeah.
right? So no, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. So this work towards becoming a chief, the balance is in relationships. My wife and I have a fantastic relationship. Even at a young marriage, she was extremely supportive of me and the need for me. Some people are made to have to do the things that
Mm-hmm.
are community or out based, and so you got to have a partner who understands who you are.
And your purpose, because there's a lot of sacrifice for the family, in terms of if you've got to pull late nights someplace, somebody else has to figure out what's going on with the other responsibilities in the family.
Absolutely. And absolutely. And when I wasn't doing the things that God was calling me to do, I was at home with my kids and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a lesson to the men, is that when you're called to things that are greater than yourself, then you have to prioritize the relationships that require you when you're not doing those things.
Right.
So my family
So it
doesn't
wasn't
miss
time
me
for
that much.
boys trips
Right,
when you could get
right.
a
See, I
break
didn't
from work.
this is what I'm talking about. Or
Yeah.
I didn't leave and go straight to the bar and kick it with my boys and then come home.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's opportunities for that. And I do that when it's necessary. But on a regular basis, I'm coming home.
Yeah.
I'm coming home. I'm tucking kids in. I'm if I got to speed and if I'm 5 minutes late, I'm going to meetings with teachers, um, because too much is given, much is required. So you it is not easy. It's climbing the scale, the rough side of the
So I'm
mountain.
going to envision this mountain
Yeah,
because
this
that's
mountain.
exactly what I think people need to appreciate when they are in the midst of climbing those mountains, because
Yeah,
they say, oh, did I sign up for this? I
I
didn't
didn't
sign up
sign
for
up for.
that.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
right.
like, yeah, you did.
Yeah, that's what
And
you did.
like you mentioned, we really don't know what's at the top because you can't quite see it. So you
Can't see it.
think you have an idea of what's at the top. You've been told what those things are, but you have not experienced it. Sometimes we get to the top and we say, this is what I was doing that for. and
Phew, that's
and
so good.
that's a whole different animal to deal with,
Yeah,
because then
that's
it
so good.
becomes a question of, well, okay, you're here now what? And I
Yeah,
think that's the next phase of the
so good.
conversation. So
That's so good.
uh, it's been fascinating to me to hear you professionally talk about how your lens shapes it as someone who sees what's coming through the coroner's office, right? And so
Hmm.
you see the deaths, you see what's happening, and with respect to fatalities. And that has shaped your ability to view where there are disconnects in our policy. So if you
Mm,
see increased suicides, or if you're seeing increased police brutality cases resulting in death, you then can see where there are disconnects in policies. Can you share a little bit about that vantage point that you have and how that has shaped your views about what policies ought to be, because you're seeing what the results are of failed policy through the bodies that come through the morgue?
man, you're spot on, Amanda. I mean, that's indeed. I absolutely can see failed policy, and or where policy fails, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
not all policy is poor policy, and it still can fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because policy and governmental um, influence is not the end all to be all to the freedom of our people.
Mm-hmm.
We owe it to ourselves to understand that no one's coming to save us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that we have to engage our
And there's no
issues.
silver bullet.
There is no silver bullet, and there's so much work because an individual has to engage in what it takes to be their best selves, with all the other things being friendly, right? And so I know that equitable access to education, economics, housing, healthcare, environmental, and criminal justice is a prerequisite for excellent outcomes. It's a prerequisite for decreasing risk, and that risk is not just not just violence, but that risk is also cardiovascular disease or asthma
Mm-hmm.
or prostate cancer or breast cancer or domestic violence or substance use and abuse. We call those things the social determinants of health, right? And so equity in those 6 areas is critical. So when we're developing policy, we need to develop policy as it relates to equity. And it's
Mm.
not just access, right? So it's not
And it's
just
not a buzzword, because I think people just throw that word around, and you just identified true determinants that should be encompassed in that term, or the
that's
use
right.
of that term.
That's right. Equity is about outcomes. So, equality is about what people get. Everybody gets the same thing. And so,
Mm-hmm.
therefore, it's equal. Equity is about, does everyone end up with a viable education, a viable job, adequate and healthy and safe housing,
Mm-hmm.
safe neighborhoods. And if those things don't exist, then everything works to create equity. Everything works to create safe and healthy neighborhoods. Everything works to create safe and healthy access to food so that you're not dealing with food deserts and don't have to go around the block, down the corner, across the street, need 2 bus passes to get to a good produce section, right?
Right.
So these are the things that if they don't exist, then they need to be created,
Mm.
right? And so that's what I'm talking about, it being policy, being friendly to sovereignty, right? Because I'm free. Let me be clear. I'm free. I've been free for a long time. And so I need the government that of this corporation called United States of America Incorporated, or the incorporation of Washington, D.C., these government corporate constructs to make it
Mm-hmm.
friendly for
Mm-hmm.
my sovereignty and freedom. And so when they're planning what goes in neighborhoods, I need them to plan to ensure that I don't have to go too far for good produce.
Right.
When they're planning how police and the criminal justice acts, then they need to plan for equitable access to safety,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the work that I'm doing in the short amount of time that I'm deputy mayor for public safety and justice is to try to create a sustainable access model for violence prevention, which goes and connects to the ones that are most at risk and says, okay, what do you need now that
And you
you've,
ask them.
yeah, oh yeah, oh
Right. So
yeah.
I think a lot of times people think that when you're in a position of influence or power, that you have the answers inherently and innately. And the truth is, the answers are within the people and the community that you seek to serve. You
and
just
it's
have to
indi-
bother to ask.
and it's individual,
Mm-hmm.
and it's person centered. I mean, science and medicine, that's why it's so good. We need more scientists and physicians to be in policy making positions because we look at things different. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about precision medicine, right? We're talking right now, we're talking about how do we get chemotherapeutic agents to activate on the genetic level, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we person centered, not just all breast cancer tumors, but how does your breast cancer tumor work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how do we use your genetics to get something that works at curing you? That's where
Right.
medicine is going, right?
Yeah.
So my thing is that's where policy has to be. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be individual person centered. Well, Dr. Mitchell, that takes so much time and takes so much money. We got money and we got time. We got both money and time. It's just how are we choosing to use the money and time.
Right.
There is no deficit in either one of them. It's just where do we put, each of them.
Right. And so let me go back into your journey because you now walked me through some of your analysis and thoughts in your role as deputy mayor uh, in Washington. But how did you end up leaving New Jersey for Washington D.C.?
I guess it was about 8 years ago, now, where I knew that I was at the height of the medical exam and I was a chief, but I was acting chief, and the current governor wasn't going to make me the full chief because of politics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, all right, I'm going to
That
leave
ugly
medicine.
thing called politics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is what it is, right? So, I mean, I'm all right with it, and made me realize that I may want to do something different
Mm-hmm.
in this space and not be in this box called the medical examiner. Um, so I was looking at my opportunities, was possibly going to get a master's of business administration in healthcare and go into the private sector and then do community work. Um, but then I got a call from a headhunter that was looking to fill the chief medical examiner position in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to get accredited. They needed a board certified forensic pathologist to do it. They knew I had ties to the area, and they said, hey, why don't you come and think about it? So talk to the wife. My wife is from DC. She's from Northeast. Went to Howard, went to GW. So this is a second home to me. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, all right, let's look at it. Came, they had a brand new state of the art facility. I mean, I'm a football guy. So, so a owner of a team says, listen, we built a brand new stadium. and we want to give you the keys to the stadium, and we want you to win me a championship. And here, and we're going to support you every uh, uh, all along the way. And I'm coming from a team that don't want me, so
Yeah,
it's to me is a no brainer.
right.
So that's what I did. I came, and I've now, been the chief medical examiner here for it'll be 6 years. Oh no, I'm sorry, it'll be 7 years in February. So yeah, I came to DC, and they weren't accredited, and there was a backlog, and we had a whole bunch of vacancies, and there was a lot of improvements that need to be put in place. And so I built a team around me, a team of physicians, a team of administrators, and really, the team and we pulled it together, and we've been accredited now for 5 years. And we're one of the best medical examiners offices in the country, bar none. And what's really awesome is that recently we got accredited by the international standards of ISO, to make sure that we were now one of only three offices that are accredited. So really excited about the work that has happened at the medical examiners here in Washington, D.C.
That's fantastic. And can you tell me then some of the things that you have witnessed through your work as the chief medical examiner in Washington in terms of what are you seeing in terms of disconnects in people's lives, increases in suicides? Are you seeing what are some of the things that are happening that you now see happen to be extremely fatal and are on the rise, or or things that we've actually improved upon in terms of decreasing deaths stemming from those things?
Yeah, one of the first things what I saw when I first got here was that we were seeing fall deaths among the elderly.
Mm-hmm.
Elderly were falling, breaking their hips or hitting their heads, and they were dying from the falls. And so I worked with the Office on Aging really early in my tenure here to get them to think about doing fall mitigation within people's homes. And so, because of the work that we've done and providing data on these falls, there's a program that goes and helps individuals mitigate their home risk for falls, and we've seen fall deaths among the elderly decrease.
Oh,
So that's an
excellent.
example of the work. When I first got here, I saw the opioid epidemic start,
Mm-hmm.
right, and I was ringing the bell from an early time frame, saw it happening, knew that it was coming. And so, DC has done a good job. We could be doing a better job, but a good job at working towards decreasing the opioid epidemic in the district. And it looks much different in urban centers than
Yeah.
it does in other places. It's older Black men that are dying. These are seasoned users that now are engaged in their normal drug use and abuse, but now that fentanyl is
Mm-hmm.
on board, which is 100 times more lethal than morphine, which is the active component of heroin, it's
Mm-hmm.
killing our grandfathers, our uncles, our fathers at a higher rate. And so
So
being
they're
able to
just picking that up in addition to an existing habit that they have,
No, it's
or
in, fentanyl acts like heroin. It's an opioid. So it's
yeah.
actually in the heroin supply. And now has replaced the heroin supply.
So people, so once someone being a heroin user then says, "Oh, this fentanyl stuff, I'll do this one instead." So it becomes a
Yeah,
drug
and
of
and
choice.
even before it was a drug of choice, they didn't know it was in their drug supply. It operates like heroin, but it
Mm-hmm.
operates with, you can put a lower concentration of it in the heroin or in another adulterant, and people become addicted, or stay addicted to opioids, but now they have a more lethal heroin substitute on
Mm-hmm.
board.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a lot, and just before I got on this call was in a summit for opioid use and abuse. So still kind of in a place where the medical examiner is speaking to the fatality, the mortality, in order to inform policy to decrease both morbidity and mortality, or illness and disease and fate and fatal outcomes.
Mm.
And we're doing the same thing with gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
So the translation of what we call mortality data, or why people die, into policy is extremely important. Another thing that we did is we developed the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, where we're reviewing how our women are dying in and around childbirth at a higher rate. And we're studying those incidents to develop policy recommendations. We've done that also for developmentally disabled individuals, child and infant.
So tell me
So
a little bit about what's happening with mentally disabled individuals. What are you seeing with regard to the prevalence of death
yeah,
in those circumstances?
the big thing is not having enough physicians, internists that know how to treat these patients. We don't really learn in medical school how to treat this particular vulnerable population. A lot of their issues are GI issues, it's swallowing issues,
Mm-hmm.
it's bowel movement issues, it's motility issues. And so you get a lot of functional issues with that. It's also cardiovascular disease because there's a lot of mobility issues,
Mm-hmm.
diabetes because there's not good cardiovascular issues. So that's a whole vulnerable population that we don't talk about a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to be talking about. And so my whole career is speaking for the vulnerable, right, and
Right.
operating in the vulnerable, where vulnerable people lie, not just because of social, economic, and institutional racism,
Mm-hmm.
which makes us the most vulnerable, even regardless of our pedigree,
Mm-hmm.
but also those that have inherent vulnerability because of their developmental delay, or because they're a child, or because they're elderly.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating, and the one thing that I want to draw the connection is it's not always the same thing that's killing people, right? Like we see changes. I'm sure you've seen a change since COVID, and we'll get to that in a second in terms of what you were seeing before the pandemic versus after the pandemic, and it continues to evolve. And so being able to speak up and advocate in the prevention world in terms of how do we stop this before it becomes fatal, I think is such an important role. And with your position, you do have an expertise and authority that I think many people do not, and can really advocate effectively in that realm. So that's always been super impressive to me in terms of how you've been able to use your platform to have such a broad impact. One might see your position as being something on the backside of these problems, but in truth, you use the fact that you have that vantage point so that you can prevent those folks from even it coming through and passing through the morgue, and being a fatality. So I just think that it's remarkable that you've been able to do that. So you've been doing this work. You've done a remarkable job in Washington, D.C. as chief medical examiner. So how on earth did you then add to this resume not a small undertaking, but deputy mayor? Tell me about that, Roger. When I heard about this, I think I was reading an article in the Washington Post, and I said, Robert, what is he doing? He added something else to his repertoire of things to do. He does them well, but things to do. So tell me how that came to be. How easy was it for you to say yes, or difficult was it for you to say yes? And share a little bit about the work that you're doing, and then we'll transition into some of the hot topics that are going on today.
Um, wow. So, yeah, I mean, there was some movement at the higher level of government. I have been, someone, like you said, translating my perspective into policy recommendations and advisement of some of the people that I've been reporting to, like the deputy mayor of public safety and justice, who was my boss. And tend to be a team player, because where I've learned my leadership is on the football field.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a time where uh, there's a racial reckoning and there's this conversation surrounding um, violence and how we reform violence prevention and the role of public health and the role of the criminal justice system, which I have, my own kind of ideas and thoughts about, and I'm clear on those types of things. And so the mayor thought it was important to use this opportunity and this interim component for her to appoint me as the interim deputy mayor, so that I can suggest to her what we should be doing as it relates to gun violence prevention in the city. And so, I've been here about a month, a little bit over a month in this position, and we're kind of tying up the bow on the plan that we've putting forward to the city administrator and to the mayor, and we'll see whether or not the plan is something that she wants to do, and will have impact in the city. And so, about you just you say yes because I find it important to be obedient than to be faithful, because the obedience is the now, the faithful, the outcome of faith is later,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the obedience is now, the outcome of faith is later. It's the
Mm-hmm.
rough side of the mountain. I need to be obedient where I'm going to put my hand and where I'm going to put my foot, and trust that I'll have enough leverage to make it to the next level,
Mm-hmm.
and then have the faith that there is something at the top of the mountain, right? To continue the metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's this. That's all this is. Someone asked me, "Are you really? Are you enjoying it?" I said, I don't know that word. That word enjoy. What does that mean? I mean, I enjoy playing golf. Like I enjoy that. Like I enjoy watching my daughter dance. Like I enjoy that, right? Like it brings a smile every time. But this is not a job you enjoy. This is a job you do to be impactful.
Yeah. And I
So
think
that's
I
what that
just
is.
want to highlight something about that because I think, we always assume that there is always an element of enjoyment with everything that we are passionate about. And sometimes the things we are most passionate about can be the most stressful things.
That's
And
right.
I think that's really great that you highlighted that because of course you try to live with this mantra in mind, try to find joy in the things that you do, but sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's around the corner, and being honest about that. I think we're not honest enough about that. And sometimes people, I think, give up too quickly on things because they weren't enjoying them yet. And maybe the enjoyment is around the corner, or maybe that's just not what you are there to do in that role. And I think that's something, especially when we're talking about public service and really getting in and getting to the nitty gritty of some of the challenges that impact our community. Some of it is going to be very stressful, but I think ultimately that impact, if that's what your driver is to have an impact, is that's kind of the indicator of, you know, whether you've done that job well. And so I appreciate you highlighting that because I think so many times, oh, I had more fun on my other job, or
Yeah.
or oh, they don't pay me enough to be stressed
Yeah.
out like this. And
Yeah.
and those are things to consider. I'm not suggesting that you don't consider them, but it's not the end all be all, particularly if you're on a mission to have impact. So I appreciate you sharing that. And
No,
I want to
absolutely.
bring your attention, because, of course, I would not be doing the audience the service that I owe them if I were not to get some of your viewpoints on some of the issues that we've seen come to fruition concerning police brutality. This has been part of your life's work. Like you said, before there was a George Floyd that was now known by all in terms of his name and that horrific act of murder. And before the situation, even with Breonna Taylor and how that's unfolding, and has been unfolding before our eyes. It has been something that you've worked on. What do you see as the right pathway? What are the answers that we should be striving toward so that we don't keep having to march time and time again over the same circumstances with different names attached?
Wow. I mean, I wish I could have, the answer, right? Because we're talking about, 400 years of institutional racism, structural racism that's built in and baked into the American experience for Africans within this country. But what I do know is there's a need to ensure that we do everything to teach the structural racism um, and the its presence in our law enforcement organizations, in our government institutions, in our schools. We need to develop and make sure that there's curriculum that's in our grade schools all the way through our high schools and colleges. We need to ensure that we're teaching what bias is and how bias plays itself out. Um,
Having training
yeah,
about that?
all of that, the training, but understand that law enforcement is the tip of the spear,
Mm,
um, and that there's a whole spear with the handle and everything that yields that spear.
mm-hmm,
And so we're going to have to get to the person that's holding it, and make sure that they understand how to use it properly.
mm-hmm,
Law enforcement has been used improperly in communities of color,
mm-hmm,
in most places. There's some places that are trying to get it right. Here in DC, we're trying to get it right. We have a police reform commission that was just set up. We have a police use of force board that is part of a new legislation. We have new legislation that is not foolproof and is not, does it has its faults because it's policy.
mm-hmm,
But there's some conscientious people that are trying to get it right.
mm-hmm.
So there's no easy answer um, to it, and but we need to call it out where racism exists. We need to be clear that it's not enough to call out racism. You need to be anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that there's an activity that goes along with your words. Um, and we just need to elevate each other to the point where we understand how important we are as individuals, and that mindset allows for us to take risk to serve each other. And
Mm-hmm.
if we're willing to take risks to serve each other, then boy, we're going to be free before we know it. So really excited about this time and this moment, because we can speak truth to power.
And let's briefly talk about this time in this moment. I mean, we've seen just unrest stemming from just the blatant disrespect and racism and systemic injustice that exists. And lots of people, maybe who were never paying attention to these issues before, maybe just weren't connected in a direct fashion in terms of motivation to actually do something about it, are now feeling motivated to go out to do something. And of course, we've got something called an election coming up. Uh,
Yeah, in a couple
can
days.
yeah, so can you highlight what you think people ought to be doing at this very moment if they do not appreciate what they have seen and unfold before their eyes, and what has been happening for many years before their eyes, whether they focused on it or not, and secondarily in terms of what future it is that they want to create.
Well, I mean, like you said, I mean, you got to vote, right? So voting is critical. Um,
But what about
uh,
those people who say my vote doesn't matter?
it doesn't matter because you don't vote.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's not gonna matter if you don't vote,
Yeah.
but it matters if you vote.
Mhm.
So if you vote, then it matters. But also, what's your passion? Who are you?
Mhm.
Because I mean, if you're a dancer, then mentor kids to dance,
Mhm.
and you don't have to be a savior to those poor kids that are in the inner city, to do it. If you feel more comfortable teaching young boys and girls how to dance in the suburbs,
Mhm.
then do that, right? Because we have to love each other where we are and
Mhm.
engage where you are. You you might only be able to raise your family.
Mhm.
Raise your family,
And do it
right?
well.
And raise your family in a way that shows love to other people,
Mhm.
not in a way that tears down and destroys other people's cultures. It's so important for us to, don't feel powerless,
Mhm.
that we have all the power, and that power, can come together and, create elections that go our way from a national level, but it also can do that at the local level,
Mhm.
at the school board, at your school, because your principal is not acting the right way towards your child. um, but getting involved and being present to us. It's okay to be selfish in your selflessness.
Mm. Say
It's
that one
okay
more
to
time.
be it's okay to be selfish in your
Mhm.
selflessness,
Mhm.
because if you find joy in what you're giving, then you're going to give more of it. So yeah, I like working hard for my people. I get value, self-value from that. And I tell my family all the time that, yeah, you might think it's selfless, but it's selfish. I like
You enjoy it.
that I like smiles, and I like, engaging, and I like empowering people to be their best self, and I like causing conflict when it's good trouble, right? So
Yes.
I these are the types of things that, you have to find out who you want to be. One
Mhm.
thing you can't be is silent.
Right.
One thing you can't be in this day and age is on the sidelines.
Right. People who want to find some meaning at this time, do you have any advice? What if they are at a fork in the road with their career
Sure.
or their path? What would you encourage them to do? How do you encourage them to stay motivated? And we'll
So
close with that question.
yeah, I think that people that are at a crossroads, and need to be motivated, is because we're fearing the decision that we know we need to make.
Mm-hmm.
Most people know what they want to do and are
Mm-hmm.
just scared to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the cop out is, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, but
But
they're
that
scared.
small, still voice in their mind is telling them, start the business.
Mm-hmm.
That small, still voice is telling them, go to school. That small, still voice is telling them, you know, ask for the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
There is that small, still voice that is operating inside all of us,
Mm-hmm.
that is telling us the good things to do. Now, there's some things that are telling us the bad things to do. I'm not saying don't listen to that voice,
Yeah.
right?
Know
Listen
the
to the voice.
difference.
Yeah, listen to the voice that builds and not destroys, right?
Mm-hmm.
But be willing to be scared, but not fearful.
Right.
Be willing to walk in that fear, walk through that.
Yeah.
You know,
That's how
you
you get
you
on the other side. You got to
you
walk. You
you
it's
got to.
never you are there's no such thing. People always say this all the time. There's no such thing as fearless people. People have fears. It's a normal sense. It's question as to whether or not you're willing to walk through them
It's
and
biological.
confront them. Right.
It's biological. It's the release of adrenaline from our adrenal cortex, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it is it is it is absolutely something that you cannot control, but you can
Correct.
control the choice and how
Exactly.
you respond to that fear.
Exactly.
And I'm scared right now. I'm talking to you right now. Just, I mean, it's not scared because of the interview, but because of the level of impact that's being asked,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no doubt about it. But guess what? Where I'm from, they say scared money don't make money.
Right.
Where I'm from, you walk through that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, nothing can be as scary as waking up and not knowing whether or not your father is dead because of a drug overdose.
Mm-hmm.
I've
And
been
that's,
I've been scared.
yeah, that's perspective. And
You
we've
know
got
what
to
I'm
have
saying?
that too.
You got to have perspective. You got to know what's real. And and I'll tell you this. My dad called me when I was 23 years old. I was still at the FBI, and he said, "Son, I want to get off drugs.
Wow.
Come get me." So me and my sister, we went and got him. We went and got him from underneath that same boardwalk, and we brought him to Washington D.C. at the time where I was living, and he lived with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we got him into an inpatient program, and then got him into an outpatient program. My father's been now sober for nearly 20 years,
Mm.
over 20 years. Goodness, yeah,
Wow.
23 years. And me and him are the best of friends. Just saw him 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was scared of
Mm-hmm.
what it would take to get through that addiction. He was scared of what his family would say when he called. He was scared. We all are scared. And for those people that are worried about the next step, I say just go.
Just go.
Just go.
Well, I love it, and I appreciate these words of wisdom from the one and only Dr. Roger Mitchell,
So
everyone.
funny.
So I have been the beneficiary of lots of good advice over the years, and just been inspired by your journey, and I'm so grateful for the impact you have had on the community and continue to have on the community, and congratulate you for the success that you have had, not just in terms of professional life, but family life, your children, all is well with them. And I am just grateful for your willingness to continue to sacrifice of yourself and be selfish in serving others. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
So good.
appreciate your words of wisdom. And if anybody wants to follow you, learn more about you, where can they find you?
Oh man, they can follow me on Twitter. I think it's Roger.Mitchell 74, R Mitch underscore Junior on Twitter. So I'm on social media, all the social media platforms under Roger Mitchell,
Okay.
LinkedIn, all of them. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much and best of luck to you. And as the man said, please go vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in.
I would like to extend a special thank you to the Texas Signal for its support of our podcast.